Several of the founders thought we should have three presidents. So that would have been interesting. Can you imagine like Trump and Biden, RFK Jr. all co-working in a space?
Baby. Oh my God.
It's
You think
insanity.
I need to make mine a double now? Whoo, baby.
So maybe
Jeez.
that's not the solution, but the solution, but we do need to constrain the power of the president. And last night's debate, to me, was such proof of that. One person should not have that much power over 330 million Americans. That is un-American to me.
Article 1, Section 1 of our Constitution says, quote, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Pretty interesting stuff, isn't it? You know, it's kind of interesting. Article 2 says, Section 1, the executive powers shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years, and together with the vice president chosen for the same term, be elected as follows, and then goes into how we elect a president of the United States. Yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Article 3 says, Section 1, the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The judge, both of the supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior, and shall at stated times receive for their services a compensation which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. Those are the words of the founding power structure of our federal government. But at the top of it, folks, at the top, it starts, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. My guest today is what he would call a human guinea pig. A.J. Jacobs is a journalist lecturer who has written 4 best-selling books. His latest book, The Year of Living Constitutionally, One Man's Humble Quest to Follow the Constitution's Original Meaning, is about his year-long effort to live out the founding principles, idea, and precepts and constraints of our Constitution. AJ joins me to talk about that journey right here on the Michael Steele Podcast, right after this. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Michael Steele Podcast. This is the day after. You remember that movie, The Day After?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of last night at the debate. We're going to get into that. I'm very excited to have on the podcast AJ Jacobs. He's got a great new book out, The Year of Living Constitutionally, One Man's Humble Quest to Follow the Constitution's Original Meaning. There you go. There he is. There he is. He's got that Patriot hat on. I'm loving it. Welcome, AJ.
Thank you, Michael. I am delighted to be here. Can't wait to talk.
It is a real treat to have you in the house. So before we deep dive into the new book and all that it puts out there, which is, again, folks, it's just great reading, a lot of fun. It's if you had the chance to get into the Year of Living Biblically, where AJ tried to live by all of the precepts of the Bible, Old Testament, dude. This one it's a great follow-up to sort of live out the Constitution. But we had a chance last night, I think, in the national presidential debate, to get a sense of, you know, this political process, where we are as a party. What was as a party of not a party, political party, but as a part of the conversation around who should be the next president. How did you see the presidential debate. What were some of your initial takeaways?
Well, I couldn't help but see it through an 18th century lens because
I
I've been
know
immersed.
that's why
Yeah.
you're perfect to have this
Uh,
conversation.
and yeah, well, it was fascinating because the founders would have been shocked. I mean, we have strayed so far from the founding vision. In some ways, that's great. You know, they were a bunch of white men, and we've expanded the vote to black people, indigenous people, women. That's great. In other ways, we've strayed in a very bad way from the founding vision. And one of those is the president. The president was not supposed to be this powerful. So it should not be that big of a deal. It should not be the focus of our political dialogue, which it is. And it back then, Congress, as you know, Congress was first among equals. It was number one in the Constitution, by far the longest. George Washington, just to give you an example, George Washington made 8 executive orders. Obama and Trump both made over 200 executive orders in their terms in office. So this is, oh, let me give you one last and then I'll
So
shut up.
before you go to that last one, that's an
Yeah,
interesting point because I think a lot of what vexes our system right now is the abdication of power by the Congress that has become basically not even a feckless member of the triumvirate, the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative power, but just have completely checked out. And so, in some regards, that has created the lane for this inordinate focus on who the man and hopefully one day woman sitting behind the resolute desk is and the power that they wield. And that is not only counterintuitive to the founders, but out of line with how they saw this idea of the balance of power.
exactly. And it is partly the Congress's fault. It's also partly the structure. You know, the Constitution never talks about a supermajority needed in the Senate to pass legislation. But let me just go back to one thing about the president being too powerful. Uh, when I loved reading for this book, I loved reading the notes of the Constitutional Convention because you get to see how it was all put together. And it was so fluid and we could have gone 100 different ways. When a delegate brought up the idea that there should be a single president, a lot of the other delegates said, are you jesting? That's a terrible idea. One president? We just fought a war to get rid of a monarch. And now you want to have one president. That's the fetus of monarchy. That's the phrase they use, the
Mm-hmm.
fetus of monarchy. So that fetus is just going to grow and grow into a toddler and an
And we know how
adult.
toddlers are, right?
Exactly. We're in the toddler stage.
That's
And
about where things are at the moment,
right.
right? We
Well,
got a
I don't,
toddler.
that's it. We got a couple of toddlers, but I don't want the toddler to grow anymore. I don't want the president to become even more powerful, which is what threatens to happen in this next election. So I think the founders would have been appalled, and several of the founders thought we should have 3 presidents. So that would have been interesting. We should have. It would have been almost like can you imagine like Trump and Biden, RFK Jr. all co-working in a space?
Baby. Oh my God.
It's
You think
insanity.
I need to make mine a double now? Whoo, baby.
So maybe
Jeez.
that's not the solution, but the solution, but we do need to constrain the power of the president. And last night's debate, to me, was such proof of that. One person should not have that much power over 330 million Americans. That is un-American to me. That
And I
is
think
monarchical.
and I think AJ, that's what sets up the contrast between both of these candidates. One who was to seize that power as it has been amassed over the last 25 years, because that's really going back to 9/11s where you really begin to see the consolidation of that executive power. Although, we know in history, Roosevelt, not Teddy, Franklin tried to do that with the New Deal. We saw Johnson try to do it with the Great Society. We saw Nixon try to do it with Watergate, where they've tried to grab pieces of control of the system to achieve their outcomes. Trump took it to a whole new level in his 4 years, and plans to do so even more so in the 2025 forward period with his Project 2025, where they lay out an expansive control of the federal bureaucracy by one person, versus someone in Joe Biden whose heart is not in that space, and is much more aligned to a more traditional view of presidential authority. Although, as you note, he is not beyond having wielded that executive authority as well with his executive orders. Where should the American people come down on this? How should they, when they're looking at these two men, particularly after last night's performance, and this for a moment, an important moment, set aside the clear difficulties that Joe Biden exhibited last night, juxtaposed against what we know Donald Trump would propose. How should we be looking at the chief executive of our nation, not just in this moment, but in setting up what the presidency is going to look like starting in 2028 and beyond?
Great question. And I think, yes, setting aside their differences in positions, you can look at their difference in belief in presidential power. And Trump is much more of a strong man. He has aspirations to be a semi-dictator. And I don't think Joe Biden does. And I think that that is an essential difference. And I think that the founders would want balance. They don't want the president to have that much power. And that's what makes me very nervous about this political moment. And as you say, it's been growing and growing. So even if Biden wins, I say we need to restrain Biden so he doesn't have that much power. And you can do it with trade war powers. When they wrote the Constitution, they said that the Congress drives the train on wars. Congress declares wars. The president executes it. The president is commander in chief. He decides where the troops go.
Put the troops and everything, right?
Right, but the peace and the declaring of war are in Congresses, and that's no longer the case. That's gone out the window. So we're going towards a monarchy, and I don't like it. I don't like it, Michael.
I know you don't like it, and that gets us right into the book, The Year of Living. The Year of Living Constitutionally. Because I was thinking about biblically, and I got to get you back on the podcast just to talk about that one, because there was just so much in that year-long experiment.
Well, but bless you, Michael. Bless you.
Give us an overview of this story that you're sharing with us at this time in particular. You're known as an immersive author. You draw people into the walk with you as you're reading. As you actually, I found myself sort of thinking out loud about what you were saying and apply, how would I kind of walk that walk and talk that talk. You wanted to commit yourself to being the originalist, exactly, as they say, in terms of the fullest expression of the constitutional rights that are set forth in the documents, as well as the overall mindset of what it was like to live in 1887. Excuse me, 1787. Talk to us about the book, and then we'll get into what it was like, and what would you draw out to share with us about that year of living constitutionally?
Absolutely. I love talking about the book. It was a great, fun one to write. It wasn't always fun to live. It was quite unpleasant at times.
Well, you got to go petition your government, right?
Exactly. But yes, so as you mentioned, I wrote one about the Bible, where I tried to understand the Bible by actually sort of following in the footsteps or the sandal steps of our forefathers. And I followed the 10 Commandments, but I also grew a huge beard, and I stoned adulterers, but I used very small stones, pebbles, so no one got hurt. But I thought that I could do a similar take on the Constitution, because they are in many ways similar, these sacred documents. And I guess it was jump started because a couple of years ago I read that 60% of Americans had not read the Constitution. And I was in that 60%. I know you went to law school, so you have read the Constitution.
Yeah.
So you were up on me, but I had never read it. And yet, every day on the front page, I would see these articles about how this 230-year-old document was having a huge impact on our lives, every part of our lives, what we see, what we can carry, what we do with our bodies. So I said, I want to understand the Constitution. And as you know, as I mentioned, the way I like to understand things is to live them. So I said, I'm going to try to get in the minds of our founding fathers by using the tools, the technology,
Right.
and reading and just dive in as if it were 1789, even though it's 2024 New York City. So that meant carrying I bore a musket around the streets of the Upper West Side. I wrote the book. I wrote pamphlets with a
With a
quill
quill
pen.
pen.
That's right, by candlelight, of course. I quartered a soldier in my apartment.
No.
I did. Yes, it was very nice. He was a very nice soldier, but my wife didn't love having a soldier
Having,
hang.
yeah.
She only let me quarter him for 3 days, but it was a fascinating experience. And as you said, it was absurd in some ways, but the bigger point was how should we interpret this document? Because how we interpret it makes a huge difference. How much should it be stuck in amber, frozen in time, and how much should we evolve the meaning? And that was at the heart of these issues I was wrestling with. And how can we save democracy is of
So
course
what
the
did you
bigger issue.
discover? How did this project set about changing your views of the Constitution?
Well, in so many ways. I mean, one thing is I don't think that the Constitution is so fascinating because it contains parts that are so inspiring and wonderful and brilliant. The parts
And I
about,
came, and I, by the way, came prepared.
oh, nice.
I've got my Constitution right here, just so there's
Pocket
any.
Constitution. I have one. I have all sorts. I have a big one. I wish I could bring it out. Uh, But yeah, even the preamble, I read that and I get chills because it's about the blessings of liberty and the general welfare. All these wonderful phrases, equal protection under the law in the 14th Amendment. Love that.
Yep.
But at the same time, it was written 230 years ago. So are there parts that are no longer relevant or at least need to be updated? And and that is what struck me so much. And it also struck me that again, the Constitution, brilliant document, but it was written by people, not by gods. And you can see that there are typos, misspellings in the I can't call them typos, quillos, whatever you want to call
Pillows.
them. So, but the word Pennsylvania was spelled two different ways: Penn Sylvania and Pen Sylvania, and they knew that it was an imperfect document. George Washington said after the ratification, he said, "This is an imperfect document. It's up to the future to change it, make it better." The problem is it's so hard to make better. It's so hard to amend because of our two-party system, which they did not anticipate. And so we do have to, I believe, when interpreting it, have a little bit of elasticity. Make it sort of like a pair of pants that has
But it
a
matters,
little give.
AJ. But it matters, AJ, who interprets it.
Totally, a hundred
Because
percent.
I don't want MAGA interpreting the Constitution. I'll just be straight up about that. I don't want them anywhere near it. I want their fingers broken so they can't write a word of it. Um, but I'm also at the same time skeptical of some others in their particular interests, which really kind of plays up, I think, in a real way what the founders went through in originally writing this thing. As you noted, one president versus three president versus no president at all. And I can't imagine today having a constitutional convention. In fact, it probably in this environment would be the worst thing I think could happen. So how does a nation reconcile itself to your point of deciding what parts of this should be placed in amber, right? And what parts are elastic enough that we can continue the path towards, as it says here, uh, establishing to form a more perfect union by establishing justice and ensure domestic tranquility and provide for the common defense. Because right now, domestic tranquility is up in the air.
Right.
The union is not perfect, nor will it ever really be. But you get the point. And the common defense and promoting the general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty. All those aspects, those attributes of the opening preamble today in 2024 offer up nightmarish
True.
storylines.
Absolutely. I mean, it is what I think the Constitution can do, and the way we can look at it to make it as useful as possible, is to make it a moral North Star. So there are those phrases I mentioned, the blessings of liberty, equal protection. Let's take those at the high level of the Constitution, because those are what make our country great.
Right.
But if you just interpret it based on the original meaning, which is what a lot of people, the majority of the Supreme Court, consider themselves originalist in some way. Some are more radical than others.
But they're full of crap because
Well, there you
they're
go.
not applying originalist point. Because if they
Totally
are
true.
applying originalism and all of that, then decisions like the one they just made today on the Chevron case
Yeah,
wouldn't fall. A 40-year standard
right.
suddenly goes away. Roe versus Wade wouldn't be overturned. So that's the infection of politics that I
That
think have
that is fascinating. I agree. I mean, there are two huge issues, right? There's one, which is should we interpret the Constitution based on the original meaning? Is that the most important thing? Or are there other factors like current day
time,
consequences?
place, circumstances. This is not 1789. This is not
Exactly.
1792. This is not even 1997.
Right. Okay, so that's one. And second is, all right, assuming you do try to interpret the original meaning, is the current Supreme Court doing it correctly? And I would say absolutely, like you said, absolutely not. They are so far off from, and this is not me. This is historians that I talk to, brilliant. I talk to dozens of brilliant historians and law professors, and it's very hard to find one who would say that the Supreme Court is interpreting. And let me just give you one example of that, which is the First Amendment. I love the First Amendment. I am as a journalist, huge fan. But I realize I love modern First Amendment. I do not love the 1789 First Amendment because the First Amendment was much more constrained in 1789. It wasn't quite Stalinist Russia, but it wasn't what
It's
we
damn
have.
near close.
Yeah. No, you could be thrown in jail for making jokes about the president. There were state laws against blasphemy. In New York, I tried to get this back for my book because, I'm living it. So it's a fine of 37 and a half cents every time you take the Lord's name in vain or you curse if you say the F word. And I have teenage kids, and I'm like, this is a good way to, clean up their act.
I can pay for our summer vacation.
Exactly. But they were very tricky. They were very legalistic and they're like, I don't have a half cent. And you said it's 37 and a half cents. So,
Right, right.
so I never got the money. But that is an example. Neither side wants to go back to the original because progressives would hate the censorship of the government, but also the original would never cover something like Citizens United, which says that corporations donating money to political causes counts as free speech. The founders would say, "What? That doesn't make sense." They were very concerned about
Corporations are not people in their
yeah,
view. Right.
well, and corruption of
And the
politics.
corruption of this.
Yeah,
So one aspect of this book that I thought was fun right out of the gate, under the heading "Stuff I Like," it was. I thought it was really kind of telling, and I thought when I read it, um, the phrase "we the people," which is for me very important. In fact, if anyone has heard me give a talk or a speech, I often refer to it as the three most important words of all of our founding documents
Love that.
because
Agree. I
the
yeah.
founders put power in the hands of the people because everything after that mattered, right? In terms
Yeah.
of what the people had control of. But and so I was thinking about it in the context of Donald Trump, who is a selfish, megalomaniac who wants everything in his image, in his liking, to his liking, and in his likeness. And you start off, we are lucky to have that phrase, we the people. The Constitution's original draft was different. It said, we the people of the states of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and then went on and, of course, list the 13 states. But Governor Morris, a founding father often described as colorful, which seems to be a euphemism for the fact that he had a lot of extramarital sex,
True.
deleted the state names. He wanted it to simply say, we the people. And that was a huge shift. Whether Morris meant it to or not, there's some debate on that. The new version altered the meaning of our country. America went from a collection of states to a collection of people. I'm sorry, folks. That paragraph for me at this hour is profoundly important. And I know you wrote those words probably a year before this moment in putting this book together. But for me, for someone like me who comes out of the background that I come out of, experienced the things that I've experienced, and have, from my youth to this very moment of this conversation, continually fall in love with this country. That to me is so important. And I'm just telling you straight up, but I will give you due props for it, will rephrase how I talk about this, because moving from a collection of states to a collection of people is important about not just identity, but about purpose. And to now see some in our country, citizens, as well as political leadership, that want to move from a collection of people to a collection of one. That to me is not what the founders ultimately thought of this enterprise.
Oh, no. I love what you say. I agree 100%. Those are my favorite three words as well. So beautiful, so important. And let me give you two reflections that your question brought up. One is just, we the people, we're so lucky to have that phrase, because back then we the people meant we the white male people. Those were the ones who
Yes.
had power. So
Yes.
thank God they didn't put in we the white male people. They just said we the people. And that has allowed us over the decades to expand the meaning of we the people to be much more inclusive. So that's Black people fought for and got the right to vote, and women, and Native and Indigenous people. So this is what I love about the phrase "we the people." It's expanded into
But
this much
doesn't
more.
that then, AJ, get to the point we were making earlier, that this idea of putting parts of this wonderful idea, document, um, instrument in amber because it's not relevant today, or it doesn't really speaks to how we should govern ourselves today, and then expanding some other attributes of what the founders laid out, doesn't that just kind of raise that conflict,
Absolutely,
and
yeah,
that concern?
right. And there are a couple of ways I could go here. Let me do one, which is the 14th Amendment came after the Civil War, and it's a wonderful amendment. It's beautiful, and it says that due process, and it talks about equal protection. Now, if you are a ultra strict originalist, you believe that it should be interpreted and applied only in the way it was meant in the 1860s after the Civil War. Now, it was written by white men who were trying to empower Black men in the South to fight racism. It was they were not thinking about women. They were not thinking about gay people and gay marriage. So if you are a strict originalist like Clarence Thomas, you say it does not cover gender, it doesn't cover sex, doesn't women's rights are not in the 14th Amendment. Gay rights not in the 14th Amendment. Now, if you are someone who's a little more elastic in your
Mm-hmm.
thinking, then you're like, you know what? Morals have changed. We've become more compassionate and inclusive. So we have to make those words apply to a bigger group. And I love that. I think it's great. Let's we that's what makes America wonderful.
So you note that to a large extent in your book, where you talk about if the world, quote, if the world returned to quills. I love the visual first off, which is great. I actually I should have brought up my prop for you because I myself write with a quill from time to time.
Are you kidding? That's
I kid you not.
fantastic.
I specifically have purchased quills over the years, but I have them put up. Oh, no, give me a second. No,
All
no, no.
right, I want
Yeah,
to
hang in
see.
there. Hang in there. Da, 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 da. So, sir, I do write with my quills.
Love it. Well,
And
that's a real one. That's not
yes, no,
that's a real
absolutely. Absolutely. And it's appropriately tipped and everything.
wow.
But but you go on and you say, if the world returned to quills, would we see a decline in trolls and rage writing, referring to the internet? Maybe. Or what if the founding fathers had written the Constitution on a shared cloud document? We all know how those things go. Would they have ever come to an agreement? And it really does talk about how much we have changed. And again, I keep going back to the point in that change where technology and other advances have altered our consideration of each other, and
Yes.
more importantly, authored and altered the way we look at this wonderful experiment. And I'm often left with the answer to that question: no, we would not come to an agreement, um,
Interesting.
because the passions
Right.
are so deep and so strongly held that, unlike the founders who had those same passions, there would be less of an appreciation of having to move off of them in order to move forward.
I love that. Yes. I mean, one of the big themes of the book is that we don't want to go back to the 18th century. It was racist, it was sexist, it was smelly. Cutting edge medicine consisted of things like the tobacco smoke enema, where they literally blew smoke up your ass. That was it was supposed to cure
Okay, I'm
stomach
going to take
pain.
a drink on that one, folks, because that's a visual I didn't need while I
I'm
was.
sorry. It's all in the pursuit of. So some ways we don't want to go back.
I'm
On
just
the other
curious how
hand,
the hell they did that, but okay, that's
I could
another
send you
podcast.
diagrams. There are
No, that's
pictures.
okay. That's another
All right.
podcast. That's good.
But on the other hand, I say let's not throw out the baby with the disgusting or dirty old cold bathwater. There are elements to their mindset that we need to reclaim. And one of those was the idea of the cold take instead of the hot take.
Right.
They didn't say hot take, but they thought you need to, instead of having an immediate enraged reaction, think about it, look at it from the big point of view, weigh the pros and cons. And that's what writing with a quill or any pen, doesn't have to be a quill, really helps, because you can't just thumb text a bunch of angry
Right.
emojis.
Right.
You have to think, you have to sit there, and if you're mailing a letter, you have to address the letter, and it allows you to have a um, not be swept away by sort of these intemperate passions. And I think we need that, because we are in a real danger where everyone is so tribal and so immediately enraged by the other side. And they were, one other virtue I want to mention is they were much better at changing their minds than we are today.
Right.
And I love Ben Franklin, my favorite founding father. He said at the Constitutional Convention, he said, The older he gets, the less certain he is of his own opinions. And he told this wonderful story, like a little parable, about a French lady who said to her sister, she said, "It's so weird. I don't understand. How am I the only person I've ever met who is correct on every single issue?" And his point was, we're all that French lady. We all think we're completely correct on everything, and we're not. So we have to have some humility and look at all sides, look at the evidence, and be open to change. And that is something we've lost with the entrenchment of these two tribes.
We're having a wonderful conversation I've been looking forward to with A.J. Jacobs. He's the author of the new book, The Year of Living Constitutionally, One Man's Humble Quest to Follow the Constitution's Original Meaning. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, A.J., I want to get a little bit into the leaders of the day versus the leaders of today, with the Constitution hanging in the balance. More with A.J. Jacobs right after this. Hey, folks, welcome back to the Michael Steele Podcast. As I said, we're having this wonderful conversation with A.J. Jacobs. And I'm going to have A.J. back because I do want to talk to him about his book, The Year of Living Biblically. But we'll get it again. I keep coming back to it because actually I want to at some point compare the two works. But before we went to break, you were talking about Ben Franklin, and you were talking about, his recognition that the older he got, the less he found himself wanting to hold on to old ideas, essentially, but evolving in a way in which he saw the country evolving. Share with us a little bit about in what you discovered in writing about this and living this experience out, as many of our founders did. Right? They're writing the Constitution while they're presumably living it in some aspects of it. What did you discover there? And what was your takeaway that you would like us to know?
Well, it was wonderful being able to talk to people from all over the political spectrum, because I had advisors who were super liberal, who basically saw the Constitution as a piece of Play-Doh that should be molded or whatever they want, versus people who were so originalist, they wouldn't even capitalize the S in Supreme Court. Because if you look at the Constitution, it's lowercase s. So why are we giving the Supreme Court a capital S? But I loved it because it helped me evolve and change my mind on so many issues, including state rights. I had a very narrow view of that, and now I feel I have a more nuanced view, which we can get into at some point.
Right.
But I think that is what we need. And one of my favorite parts of the whole experiment was I had, in the First Amendment, it says you have a right to assemble. So I decided to assemble a bunch of people in my apartment and have an 18th century dinner party. And I put on my tricorn and my whole outfit, and my son made beef stew with cloves. They loved their cloves back then.
Right.
I wanted turtle soup, but we couldn't source a turtle.
Well, yeah, that's a little hard to do. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
It's probably better. I don't have poor turtles.
Yeah, we don't need to do that.
But I invited people from all over the political spectrum, right wing, libertarian, progressive. And we had a lovely discussion about the Constitution and the future of America. And it was, no one screamed, no one threw rum punch in the other person's face. And we didn't solve all the problems, of course, but we agreed on one thing, which was that we need more of this. We need more of people getting together and having civil conversations, trying to explain their point of view and figure out what can we do from here. Instead of seeing it as a war, see it as a puzzle. Like, how can we change the other person's mind? And if not, how can we change our own mind? And if neither of those are possible, where can we go from here? What common ground do we have? All of these things, if you look at them as like a puzzle instead of this fight to the death battle, this zero-sum game, then it becomes possible to do democracy.
Is there anything to that point from the founding era that you would like to see revived or would be worth reviving today?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, two things come to mind. First of all, they did do this a lot. And Ben Franklin had what he called the junto, which was a group of people who had dinner parties every Friday night, I believe, and would just talk about the issues.
Today
And
we call those salons, right? We would have you have
that's true. But yeah, the salons, I think, are drowned out by the rage on the internet,
yes,
which is,
yes.
you're anonymous, you can say whatever you want. It's very hard to have a civil discussion on the internet. The other thing I think that one of my favorite parts of the whole book project was the idea of recapturing the joy of democracy,
Hmm.
because elections at the start of our country were not seen as some sort of annoying chore like jury duty. They were seen as a festival. It was like this amazing new right, with a big asterisk that this
Hmm.
new right was only available to some. But they thought, amazing, we can choose our leaders. And so there was music, there were parades, it wasn't quite Coachella, but it was fun. And you would go there and there would be rum punch and election cake. They had these huge election
Oh
cakes.
yes, I remember discussions about election cakes. Yeah, yeah.
Well, brought it back for my book. I brought back the election cake with or without the cloves. So the
Right.
original recipe has cloves, but you don't need it. And I went on Facebook, which I know is not 18th century, so apologies. Although it is one of the older platforms, so I thought it's a little
Yeah, well,
closer.
it'll translate all right. Yeah.
And I got hundreds of people in all 50 states to bake cakes, bring them to the polls, bring them to work, to try to remind people democracy is sweet and we've got to fight to keep it. That the cake is just the start. We've got to reform gerrymandering and all that. But it was so lovely. It made me so happy, and so many other people wrote how this was one little positive note in such a dark time that I'm doing it again. I'm doing this coming November. I want thousands of election cake bakers, bakers for democracy. And let's remind ourselves of what we're doing here and how we need to fight for it.
Such a special treat, and certainly uh, poll workers and folks just standing in line to vote would appreciate having a little election day cake.
The poll workers were so hungry. I felt
They
terrible.
generally are.
Yeah.
They get them there at like 5:30 in the morning to get set up and ready to rock and roll, and they're there until they get to go home, and
Yeah.
barely get the
Bless
bathroom
them.
break. So the cake could help.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We need to feed our election workers better.
You mentioned the Supreme Court a little bit earlier, and the fact that in the Constitution is written with a lowercase s, and today the court is going through a very difficult and I think deserved downturn in its. I hate to use the word popularity with respect to the court because I think the word respect should be more appropriately used. So I will. A downturn in the respect people have for the court. How have originalists like Clarence Thomas and Alito and others impacted rulings on abortion, guns, and even as we see literally within hours of us having this conversation on the economy of the country, sort of again destabilizing what the legislative and the executive branches had created in terms of regulatory reforms that would allow agencies to handle certain matters. Now the Supreme Court is saying no, those fall in the purview of the court. Is that an attempt, for example, to streamline the overreach by the executive and to curtail that back? So as an originalist, that works. But then how does that play up against other issues that we've seen, like voting rights, abortion, and guns?
Right. Well, I think we talked about how the founders would be shocked by how powerful the president is. They would be equally shocked, maybe more so, by how powerful the Supreme Court is. The Supreme Court was third among equals. You look at the Constitution, it was Article 3, was much shorter. It was not meant to be the ultimate arbiter on how Americans should live. And that's what we have now. We have these 9 unelected people who are acting like imperial leaders, and it
Mm-hmm.
is insane. The founders would be shocked because most of the founders believed in an independent judiciary that should have some say in how the Constitution is interpreted. That's judicial review. They
Right.
did not believe in judicial supremacy. That's what we have, where they have the final word on what is and is not constitutional. And today's ruling is an example of that, overturning Chevron, because that has massive effects on millions of people. And it's these 9 unelected people uh, who are who are controlling our daily lives, and that is very un-American, in my opinion. Back then, the most of the founders, if you talk to them, some were a little more pro Supreme Court than others, like Hamilton, but most of the founding fathers, if you talk to them, believed that the Constitution should be interpreted by all 3 branches. They all have a say:
Hmm.
President, Congress, and the Supreme Court. Look at Jonathan Gannap at Stanford, has done wonderful books and articles about this. And this, so they would be like, wait, you're saying that the Supreme Court gets to overrule Congress? That's crazy. And that rarely happened in the start of our country.
So
Even
then how would they then, AJ, resolve I mean, I remember my first year law classes on Marbury versus Madison.
right.
Is that what we're talking? Is that what we're talking about? Was that a change, if you will, or how does a case like that? And just so folks know, that was the case that delineated executive power, and the Supreme Court had a little bit to say about that.
Yeah, well, that was fast. And the traditional narrative is that John Marshall, who was Chief Justice, at that moment he said the Supreme Court is the ultimate judge. Now, what's interesting is that uh, many scholars now say that is so overstated, that he did not. He was much more modest. He just wanted to get in the mix. And if you look at it, he did not overturn a single other congressional law in his long term. And now the Supreme Court is overturning Congress right and left. And
Mm-hmm.
you look at the biggest constitutional issue, the fight of the day was the national bank. So Congress, they fought about it, they passed it, the president did not veto it, and they're like, okay, that's done. Nowadays, there would be lawsuits out the yin yang, and the Supreme Court would have final say. And that's just not, because they're unelected. We need term limits. We need to rein them in, just like we need to rein in the president. And the founders, I think, were wrong on many things. They were, as I said, racist and sexist, but they were right that Congress should be the one that has the power, because that's who's elected by the people. That's
That
what is
that yeah that
democratic.
and that aligns in terms of consistency with this idea of we the people. Um, so what? How then do you wrestle that back when you're looking at the way the Supreme Court is behaving, where they won't even govern itself with
Right.
appropriate ethics rules? The way the Congress is behaving, where it is completely checked out of the process, and is on its best day a sycophant for whichever administration they happen to be aligned to. Which then, of course, leads to the third problem, which is the executive branch itself, with someone who is arguably more constitutional friendly than Donald Trump, nonetheless has wielded executive power in a way that would be antithetical to the founders. So, how does this system correct itself?
Great question. I mean, I went to the Supreme Court as one of my adventures, and it was fascinating. First of all,
First off, did you show up with the musket and the tricorder hat? I mean, did you? How did you?
I figured the musket might be hard to get through security. They won't
Right,
even let you have like a cell phone. So musket,
right.
I'm not sure. And also, I'll tell you this. that the way to get it, there are 50 seats reserved for the public.
Right.
And but you have to wake up. If it's a big case, you have to stand in line for like a week. If it's a small case, you have to wake up at 3 in the morning and get in line, which I did. What shocked me was the guy in front of me turned out to be a paid line waiter. Like
Yeah.
someone paid him $200 to wait in line. That's not democratic. That's un-American. I was like, let's get rid of that.
Right.
But on a bigger scale, let's get reforms in the Supreme Court. The first and most obvious, which is endorsed by both sides, is an 18-year term limit. We can't have these people in their 80s. I barely understand the internet. I don't understand the internet. How is an 84-year-old who like is grew up on wow,
On the
radio,
quill pen.
right, practically how they should not. So yes, let's start with that, and then there are people smarter than me who have other reforms, but we can make that happen. And we don't necessarily need it in a constitutional amendment. You talk to some of these great legal thinkers, you can get that 18-year term. There are ways to do it without the constitutional amendment. So let's do it. Let's get
How I mean, you had both Samuel Alito and Chief Justice John Roberts pretty much declaring we are not subject to the authority of the Congress. I would quickly point out, well, then you clearly don't want to get paid next week because it is the Congress that that cuts your paycheck, pays for your light bills, covers everything that you're doing inside the building. Where does that arrogance come from, and how do you contextualize that? I mean, I'm sure that was not something the founders ever thought a judiciary would do, or how a judiciary would
right.
behave. But it does also reflect, I think, sort of at a point in time of progression and advancement, this separation of powers really becomes a separation of powers.
Great point. Yeah. And they should be interlocked, as you say. And there are lots of places where the Supreme Court gained power. One of them was William Howard Taft, our
Mm-hmm.
largest president physically.
Mm-hmm.
He was president, and then after his presidency, he became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And he basically said, I'm going to make the Supreme Court as powerful as the president. So before Taft, the Supreme Court was in these humble digs, like they were in rooms in the Capitol.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, it was like a building in New York that was above a butcher's market. But he said, we got to build this beautiful building. And that's the current Supreme Court. It looks like it's from the 1700s or Greek, it looks like a Roman temple, but it's not. It's from the 1930s. And he was the one who's like, um, there was a lot of pushback. A lot of the justices themselves said, this is ridiculous. It's so pompous. We look like we should be riding in on elephants. This is not the Supreme Court. But he pushed it through, and that helped gain more and more power. That's just one place where the court gained more power. But yeah, now I went there, and it was awe-inspiring because it makes you feel
Majestic
small.
building. It is a majestic building, no doubt.
Right. So, but yeah, let's that is part of there's several places, and the Lochner era is one that law professors can talk about better than me, but there are several points in American history where the Supreme Court did a power grab, and we need to take that power back.
How did this particular journey, uh, looking at the Constitution, compare to the Bible?
Well, it was interesting. I mean, they both were fascinating to me. I would say in some ways it was easier because with the Bible, Leviticus says you cannot shave the corners of your beard. I didn't know where the corners were, so I just let the whole thing grow. And I looked crazy, like beyond
I
Brooklyn
can see you
hipster.
standing in the mirror now. Well, okay, corner. I don't have a square face. I don't understand.
It's very hard.
What are they
Yeah.
talking about?
You got to be safe. So I looked like
You just let it grow.
I let it grow. You're old enough to remember ZZ Top, so I
Oh
kind of looked like
yes.
ZZ
Oh,
Top.
you got down to the ZZ level, huh?
Maybe not quite, but I got down to like my mid stomach, my mid torso.
Wow.
And my wife hated it, so she didn't kiss me for 7 months. And so that was one example. Like in this one, I didn't have the beer. I had the tricorn hat. She hated their. I bless my wife. She puts up with my experiments, and does in the end, I think, enjoy some parts of them, but
Right.
other parts. I was trying to work by candlelight, so I started out with the original candles, which are beef fat candles, beef tallow. So, and they're smelly. Like the apartment smelled like meatloaf. And she's like, enough with those. And then I had the
Your
quartering
poor
of the
wife.
soldier. She's very patient. At some point, she almost gave in, and she joined me in this Revolutionary War reenactors group, and she put on the bonnet and the corset. She hated the corset because, I mean, that was uncomfortable.
Yeah, I
These
was gonna say
women,
who wouldn't hate a corset, right?
yeah. uh, so yes, she was very patient. In the end, I think she loves history, and it was just so fascinating to learn all of the history of America and how we got here and how we can go forward, that I think she forgives me.
So yeah, right, right. Yeah, you're gonna have to
I think.
definitely make up on that one, my friend. I can, between the house smelling like meatloaf and the beard down to your belly, and not to mention that every room you're in, you can only have a candle burning.
Exactly. Yes,
What she was like, no, no, I'll be in the living room. Just
she would flick on the lights, and I'd be, wait, I have a candle.
I gotta write this by with my little feather here, right? With my little
Oh
feather
yeah,
pen.
she hated the sound of the quill. I mean, that
Oh,
it's
they're
quite
yes.
noisy.
People don't
Yeah.
realize they're loud.
Yeah. Well, what's funny, Michael, is there are ASMR videos, ASMR,
Uh-huh.
of people writing with a quill, because it's such a nails on the chalkboard sound that some people love it.
Oh, that's too funny. That is too funny. So, before I let you get out of here, what was the most difficult part about living constitutionally for a year? We can talk about the physical constraints and the smell of beef candles and so forth, but I'm talking about in terms of what you claim to realize about the document, um, the men who wrote it, and sort of coming to grips with how this whole thing sort of evolved into where we are today.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say one of the hardest parts was just figuring out what should we do with this document. And there are many ways we can go, but I'll just highlight two of them, because they're very historically important. So right before the Civil War, you had two great abolitionists. You had William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass. So William Lloyd Garrison, he was a white man,
Yep.
and he said the Constitution is a pact with the devil because it condones slavery, even though they were too craven to even use the word slavery. They use like labor and service
Mm-hmm.
euphemisms. But he says it's a pact with the devil. It deserves to be burned. And he was a showman. So he would burn a copy of the Constitution on stage in front of hundreds of people while they whooped and cheered. Now, originally, Frederick Douglass was on his side and said, yeah, it is a pact with the devil. But at some point in the 1850s, Frederick Douglass changed his mind. And he said it would be better to frame the Constitution as a promissory note. It's not a pact with the devil. It's a promissory note because it promises liberty, it promises equality. And yet, America is so far from that. So let's make America live up to the best ideals of the Constitution. And that is such a powerful idea and framing. Martin Luther King Jr. used
Mm-hmm.
it, called the Constitution a promissory note. Obama talked about the seeds of the problems in the
Mm-hmm.
Constitution are the solutions are within the Constitution itself. The seeds of liberty, we have to grow them. So that is so inspiring to me. Like you can focus on the faults of the Constitution, or you can try to make it America live up to the best parts of our founding principles of equality and liberty, and and prosperity.
I told you it was going to be fun, folks. The year of living constitutionally, one man's humble quest to follow the Constitution's original meaning. AJ Jacobs, thank you, man, so much. This was really enlightening, folks. It's a great summer read. It's an easy book. It's a fast book. You get into character with AJ. You really do. The photos of him with the cake on election day is just priceless by itself. It's a good one, AJ, and it's an important one, I think, given the rest of what we're about to do as a country, as we select one man to lead us for the next 4 years. And a lot of people out there saying, I wish I had a different choice. I wish I had a better choice. I think after reading this and spending time with you, the question is, which choice is going to be best for our Constitution?
Yeah, and
Best
our people.
And our people. And I think that that's something that individually we're going to have to make up, because as we both noted, the most important part of what we do in this country is we, the people.
Absolutely. And Michael, I just want to thank you, A, for having me on, but B, for doing what you do, which I think is the heart of democracy. And the founders, even though many were racist, so they would have trouble with that, but the founders would love your podcast. And you would, I think that you are doing democracy. You are the verb of being a great citizen. So thank you for that.
I appreciate you very much for that. And maybe I'll do an AI podcast with Hamilton. That ought to be fun.
Yes.
That'd be a lot of fun. AJ Jacobs, journalist, lecturer, as he liked to put it, human guinea pig. Thank you, my friend, for coming on and spending time with my crew here at the Michael Steele Podcast.
Well, thank you. And of course, good morrow. I got to end with that.
Good morrow. Good morrow, sir. All right, folks, that does it for our time together. I really appreciate when you dive in with me and spend some time with great guests like AJ Jacobs. If you like the podcast, tell a friend, certainly share it, give us a like on podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts in particular. Share the love, do the download. Follow AJ on X, Twitter. I prefer Twitter, at AJ Jacobs. Folks, as we get ready for conventions and refocus our energies and minds to vacations and all of that, don't lose sight of what's important right now. And that is making a decision and coming to terms with what kind of nation we want to be versus the kind of nation we are right now. And I say good morrow to all of you as well.